So hello, Seattle. Thanks for joining us today on our fourth webinar for the Engineering and Talent Acquisition Town Hall, where our panelists discuss their vision and strategies, defining and adjusting to the new normal for attracting and retaining talent. FYI, we are recording this webinar and look forward to sharing the slides and recording afterwards. So my name is Anders Sundquist. I founded Flawless Recruit in 2017. We are a Seattle-based boutique recruiting agency, and we specialize in talent mapping for full-time, contracting, and executive search. And our talent mapping strategy to hiring, this includes market research, where we identify signals for hireability and run personalization campaigns at scale. We've doubled headcount for many engineering teams, averaging 90% acceptance rate, building robust diversity talent channels, and host networking and diversity inclusion events for our clients. So during the mandatory social distancing, our clients asked, how is the market responding? Curious, what are other companies and leaders doing during COVID-19? Well, this inspired us to connect the tech community and create a digital forum to share tribal knowledge for success during these unprecedented times. So we hope you learned something useful from today's webinar, and we welcome your feedback afterwards in the Qualtrics survey at the end. So allow me to introduce our panelists today. So first up, we have Annie Rihn, is the Vice President of Recruiting for Zillow Group. Hey, Annie. Annie has built Zillow's recruiting function from the ground up since joining the company pre-launch in 2005. She is passionate about diversity and inclusion and is a notable speaker on recruiting, hiring innovations, and D&I forums. Next, we have Ronit Bohrer Hillel. She is a Senior Director of Engineering at Smartsheet. She brings more than 20 years of engineering leadership to both corporate and startup companies. And Ronit came to Seattle area to join Amazon in 2014. She's passionate about helping people reach their career goals, promoting women in engineering, and creating an inclusive work environment. She is a trained life coach and uses coaching at work and at home. Next, we have Jen Stoural, the Director of Global Talent Acquisition at Smartsheet. Hey, Jen. She's been with the company for over 4 years, and she previously held leadership roles at the Schlossberg family of companies, First National Bank of Omaha, and others. Jen wears many hats: motivator, bad cop, competitor, and achiever. And she believes in the success of the team. Next, we have Andrew Sinclair, who is the Corporate Vice President and General Manager for the Motorola Solutions Public Safety Software business, where they are transforming to a cloud software, services, and a devices company. So previously, Andrew was the GM for Skype, and he also spent 11 years with Microsoft as a GM and partner. He's led 2 companies that were successfully acquired by Microsoft. And originally from South Africa, Danielle Monaghan is the VP of Global Talent Acquisition from Uber. Danielle has been a recruiting and HR leader at Amazon, Cisco Asia, Microsoft China, and T-Mobile. Her breadth of knowledge around talent is vast, and she is a diversity champion. Have her tell you about her pet cheetah sometime. I'm sure that will come up in Q&A, Danielle. And last but not least is Chris Gootherts. So Chris is the managing partner here at Flawless Recruit. Chris has over 25 years in recruiting, including having founded 2 international recruiting firms and held leadership roles with Apple China, Microsoft China, and Amazon. And Chris is also an accomplished professional piano player, which we all just heard. So Chris is going to be our moderator today, and take it away, Chris.
Okay, thanks, Anders. And first, I just want to thank the panel. It's just great to have such, talented people who understand the different perspectives of both recruiting and engineering. From this level, it's going to be great, I think, to share. And I'll share with the people that are listening in. I kind of feel like we have an opportunity to do a little brainstorming here, and I wanted you all to participate in that both online. And so we will be taking Q&A. And I think you'll probably have some very interesting questions for our panel. That'll be probably toward the end, but if we see something pertinent that comes up during the discussion, Anders will jump in with what that might be if you put it in the Q&A queue. Or if you want to chat with us, then you can use the chat button also there at Zoom. So let me kind of kick it off, and we'll start off by asking the panel this question. Do you think that COVID-19 has caused engineering departments and companies to reduce their requirements on local hires for information workers? In other words, will recruiting be freed up to be able to start recruiting people from other places, regardless if there's a dev center there or not, allowing more remote work? I'll put that, Annie, you smiled. I'm gonna get to, we'll start off with you.
I'm happy to start, and I do smile a lot, so I guess that doesn't mean you have to call on me first, but I'm happy to. So welcome everybody. Thank you for joining. I'm happy to be here with my fellow panelists. So Chris, I'll kind of maybe reframe it a little differently if you don't mind, and just in terms of how we're thinking about it. And I think it's going to get the heart of what we're trying to get at. And in order for us to hire talent that doesn't sit by a dev center, so let's say fully remote talent, there's a lot of work that has to be done, a lot of thinking, a lot of innovation that has to be done, I think, first before we get there. So if you take a step back, if you think about requirements, you think about our interview process, you think about our culture, our criteria, everything's been predicated on that in-person experience, how we do our work, how we collaborate. And then COVID hit, and everything was turned upside down. We immediately innovated. We figured out how to remote interview. We figured out how to remote onboard and do our work remotely. And I think overall it's going, I'd love to hear from our fellow panelists and see too. I think overall, it's, at least for us, it's going pretty well. Certainly we have our pockets where it's really, really challenging for certain people, and we're doing our best to lean in and support those folks as they need it. But we're still early in that journey. So the question is, how sustainable is this? And then when we identify how sustainable it is, we're hearing from our employees that people don't, I'm going to get to the, like, can we hire remotely here? But you have to think about all this context, is our employees are saying they want more of a hybrid environment. I think a small percentage wants to be fully remote, but what we're hearing so far, the early indicators, is that they want more hybrid. So all that being said is that I think we will need to open more dev centers so that we can have a broader footprint. We have, let's say, 9, opening up more of them across the nation, so we can at least have some space for people to come into if they want to, and to be in closer proximity. So I think all that being said is then we'll get around to being able, can we lift the requirements? Yeah, it's a yes and to that question, because all those other things have to be considered. And also we have to get better at remote interviewing. We have to get better at, like, putting a lens on equity in our interviewing process for people. If we're going to have, disparate practices for people that are working fully remote, or people that are going to be coming in the office. So just a lot of really exciting things for us to solve. And the short answer is I think it's yes and.
Yeah, it's interesting, because I think that what's happened with COVID is it's queued up, or accelerated, if you will, some of this thinking that I think has already been somewhat on the table, but it's really queued it up as a fresh thought. And, Andrew, your experience with Skype in particular, I would think might lend to, is this anything that's been foreseen, or is there, any strategies that were ever thought of at Skype that would be able to enable more remote work?
Well, interestingly enough, my first day of ever meeting a Skype employee was my second day of employment. So when I left Microsoft, it was 10 years ago, I think. Well, I don't know, I'm not even sure what day it is today, but anyway, it was a long time ago. And I did the entire interview process on Skype, obviously. And we would regularly do that. So some companies have been practicing. I don't think any company that wasn't already very remote knew how to do it. So I think everybody's had a crash course in it. I know here at Motorola Solutions, we are a very distributed company. I have dev centers around the world, but we still had a very strong bias to have people in offices and to interview face to face. That's changed dramatically, and we're having to adapt. Some of our best innovations have been recently in the last couple of months, people innovations, that is, because we've been forced to. So for instance, our Bangalore office, culturally and logistically didn't work at home. We've just canceled a move to a new building, and we're going to have 100 people all work at home because of this. because we just got a crash course in how to do it. And then if I loop back to your original question, I don't think the bar is going to be lowered. I think we still maintain the high bar on employees that we hire. I think we're going to be more open-minded. I don't see it as being a free-for-all, though. I don't, you know, we're not going to have some guy living in Wisconsin just because he wants to live in Wisconsin. In fact, we collapsed a lot of that a couple of years ago because we had a lot of that happening. But we are going to see dispersion happening. We're going to see people spreading out a little bit. Unlike Annie, I don't see us opening new offices. And this is actually more of an opportunity for us to reduce our real estate footprint because we don't need it. We can do an awful lot more working at home and be more flexible. So I think that the answer is the right talent will be given flexibility.
Fascinating.
I want to add in and chip in and use two examples that I had from the last 2 months. And I'm very supportive of Annie and Andrew's approach. It's a lot about the organization culture and where that culture would go forward. So about a month ago, I was hiring for a principal engineer, which is a position that is quite challenging to fill. And my recruiter came to me and said, hey, are you willing to think about folks from all around the US without relocating them? And I paused for a minute and I thought, like, are we ready for that? Am I ready to take one of the most important leading positions in an area that I have and say, no, that person would be remote and they would never have a very close interaction on the day-to-day. And I decided to say no, actually. And the reason for that is I think that we first need to make a decision, how do we actually work? Most of the folks we surveyed around as well were positive about doing combined work, part at home and part enjoying the social element of the office. So if I'm taking a lead position, I would want that still to be local, at least for now, till we shift our culture away. The other thing is I have remote employees for the last year, and I could see, and I had one person that actually submitted to be a remote employee just again in the last month, and I see that very successful where the teams are open for that and the employee has the right mindset on how to work remote, right? It's not the same working remote. It's not the same working remote when not everybody is working remote. So all of that needs to be taken into consideration before we move and make that decision to recruit. I have other engineering colleagues, engineering manager colleagues from other big companies around here, and I'm aware that some made this really loud declaration that they're going to move it to hire people that from start be remote. Smart sheet culture is about having people interaction and supporting each other. I think that the day will make that complete decision would be a shift in our culture, and we need to figure that out. So I'm inviting an organization to figure out first what's the culture they want to create and evolve to, and then make that decision.
Yeah, I would add to that. I think Uber's approach is probably a mix of everything that you've already heard. We are a culture that really values, especially in engineering, really values having teams together. And we have multiple development sites globally, but in the past, we've liked people to be in the office. We've loved the collaboration. We've loved the innovation, jam sessions. But that being said, given that we have distributed sites and multiple offices in San Francisco, we got used to working using Zoom years and years ago. So when this hit, it was actually not very difficult to switch to remote work. I think Ronit, what you said about culture is so critically important because we certainly have faced that. We will not be 100% remote. We will be much more flexible than we have been in the past. We will never go back to everybody being back in the office at the same time again. I think those days for us are over. But I believe we will have our folks come in 2 days a week, 1 day a week, 3 days a week, and still have our remote development center. So I think we fall somewhere in the middle in our approach.
Do you think it changes by job function? Is there a different rule for different job functions?
I do think it changes by job function. I don't think I'm going to bring my recruiters back full time. And I am going to go where the talent is for recruiters rather than hiring recruiters in hubs. So I do think there could be a case for job functions doing things a little differently.
Yeah, plus one.
Yeah, +1 on that too with Smartsheet. We really did focus in on the higher level, the senior SDEs or principal SDEs to be hiring at this moment. We scaled back on our internship program with the level of talent that is coming in and being able to support them remotely. Our teams are distributed across their functionality and what that looks like. So having a junior SDE or SDE2 coming in and not having that interaction face-to-face and collaboration with the team, we chose to take a pause on those hires currently and focus on the more tenured and experienced folks coming in now. So a +1 on that. Yeah.
I've heard a couple of things here that are fascinating to me. One is, Ronit, I think you were mentioning about how you almost individually need to be able to determine if somebody is, I want to say, could do well remotely, whether or not they could, if this suits the person. And also what you just mentioned, Jen, as far as internships, and I'm sure that this is going to change the thinking around internships and around the mentoring process in and of itself if people are more remote and less in hubs. It sounds like you've already taken that into consideration as well.
We have taken it into consideration. In Ronit's team is the engineering interns are the ones that we did choose to move forward with. So I'm curious, Ronit, they've just started. So I'm curious what kind of experience you have been having remotely with them.
In my team, they're going to be starting. So
okay, haven't started yet. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's definitely the level of the folks, what they do. And I actually want to invite us to think about this kind of, in some sense, gift that was given us to see how we can very productively work remote, allow us to use that as a tool and allow teams to set their own path. So if I'm running multiple engineering teams, each of them have different characteristics. Some of them would really enjoy everybody working 4 days out and 1 day in, or even completely remote. That works for them. And some are completely social, want to see each other every day, and even now having those open, endless chats happening, whether it's video or just chat. And the fact that they can do that is the big thing. And so if we go back to recruiting, if I want to hire, I would tailor that as well. I would go to my recruiter and say, hey, this is a great team that already is working with multiple remote employees. Let's hire remote there. And this one needs another thing.
And we currently have been coming from a lens of having the autonomy to be able to figure that out and having our teams make those choices for themselves and what's been working for them. So that's been helpful on building out what we're looking for in this work from home space.
So there was, somebody posted a question a few minutes ago, I think Alpesh Patel. Do you think that COVID-19 impact productivity, has impacted productivity? And if yes, how to improve productivity and innovation? Any thoughts on that?
So
I can speak for us. It surprisingly increased our productivity, which we were not expecting. I don't know about the others. I think Danielle, you had something.
No, I had the exact same experience in our engineering org. Our productivity increased. In recruiting, no, because we slowed down recruiting. But there's no question that once we pick up hiring again, I have no doubt our productivity will improve.
I found that it increased productivity. Engineers are beasts that love their quiet time. So when you give them quiet time, they're much more happy. And there are a lot of articles talking about how should you allow them to have their Zen time of a couple of hours. Otherwise, you're not going to get this creativity and flow of work. But another thing, because I work a lot with people with families and people with more diverse folks, I see that also with the COVID-19 situation, creating some less inclusive or less equal opportunities, maybe that's the better word for that. So if I take folks with young families, young kids, it's extremely hard for them, and their productivity actually was reduced down. People with high tech is very international, so people have families all around the world. That has been a cause of concern, to the point that I have one employee that decided to figure out how he can relocate back home to be with his elder parents. So I think it created less equal opportunities, that now your personal state is even more profound because you've been working 24/7 or like intermingling your life and work. So much to do.
I am happy just to jump in with a few additional thoughts. Everything you just said, it really resonated with me as well. And I think some of the experiences we're just trying to be mindful. This notion of productivity is really an interesting one. I mean, I mentioned sort of sustainability. We talk a lot about that. And I think right now everyone's really jumping in and rising to the occasion and really doing the best that they can and focusing on the things that are in their control and not in their control. But it's really bringing forward some opportunities, with this sort of notion of asynchronous and synchronous learning and interviewing and with workers. And we're just going to have to do work differently now. We're going to have to think about productivity and those really measures of what we deem to be success, even how this ties back to performance management and our view of that. Like, we've got to fully reimagine that. And we've even been talking just a little bit more on sort of that employee experience level too. If you think about, I shared with my team this quote last week, which was, your value is not measured by your productivity. And I think people needed almost that sort of permission to just kind of exhale for a second and recognize that, right now is not, again, people are doing the best that they can do. And there's some really challenging situations that people are dealing with at home that impede their ability to sort of do work in that sort of time frame to have the same outputs. And so, again, people are really leaning in, and even just the process of rebuilding this sort of vibrant and virtual culture that I think we're all really trying to, for each business, we're really trying to bring that to life for our own companies. Culture carriers there, those contributions are actually equally as valuable, and that is productive, and that is productivity, but it might have been something in the past that perhaps you might not have quantified as such, but now we've got to place weight on that. So, we think a lot about it, but just a different perspective on productivity.
No, I think that's 100% right. And with that, what I'm finding we're really evolving to is the notion of radical empathy, which is exactly that. Everybody's situation is different. Some of our employees, one has to work in the morning and they do childcare duties, or work in the evening. They're in small apartments, of course, in San Francisco with multiple roommates, and they have to try and navigate that. And as leaders, we have to have radical empathy. I think that helps with productivity too.
Brilliant. There's a question on productivity that came up from one of the people participating here. He asks, what are your views on productivity measurement technology? Is that on the table at all? And if yes, how are you thinking of using the data? And I think you're kind of speaking to that already. I'm hearing more individual considerations for people, probably so much more so than the early 20th century, where we had a factory mentality. It's like you punch in, you punch out, right? I mean, I'm hearing an expansion of how we look at our employees and the people that we're working with in what you're saying. But what do you think about productivity measurement technology?
We don't use it at all, and I've never had a high opinion of it. Lines of code, story points, it's all rubbish, in my opinion, humbly. The only thing that matters is, are you getting value into the hands of customers fast enough? And you measure that through good management. Any artificial measure, I've tried to use at least, I'd love to hear if somebody's worked out one that works, is just a way to performance review people. And that's of no value. You performance review people by talking to them and their peers, not by tools.
People have a tendency to fulfill the goals that you put in front of them. And when you start putting those productivity measurement technologies and starting measuring whether it's line of code or contribution to merge release or other things, you start having people very focused on those anecdotal things versus how well are they doing in delivering, how well are they doing with their peer and communicating and driving change around and positive influence around the organization or the group. And it's not that I think you shouldn't be using them at all, but I don't think that they are the first measurement I would actually use. There would be rare occasion where I think there is some performance problem where I would want to look at whether the hunch and the feedback I'm getting from multiple peers is in the right direction, that I would go and look at, for example, how is the actual work that they're doing and use some of that. But I'm with Andrew. I think that they're more demoralizing than encouraging usually. I love to use KPIs that are customer oriented. How many adopted that new thing you built it? How well is it doing, and what's the SaaS score for that? And look at that as kind of way to motivate, whether it's engineers or product or UX designers and so on.
I think that's an interesting question when you think about from recruiting perspective and the way that we do measure productivity in recruiting. Any of our recruiting leaders have a thought about productivity tools or the KPIs and maybe even how that's
changing? I'm happy to jump in, and Danielle, if you have some thoughts too, would love to hear as well. It's interesting. So we have an OKR process that we're using for the whole business, and that's been a really great way for us to sort of anchor and align our, to our mission, to our core values, and then what's like the key bodies of work that we want to all be sort of backing our work into. But specifically for recruiting, we're actually just have kind of gone through the process of really reimagining our candidate experience and have really questioned a lot of the metrics, sort of the old metrics that have existed for many, many years. And we've arrived at a place of really reframing what we find to be a value is candidate connections. And what we're most interested in is it something that is in our team's control. If you think about metrics, you have to think about what in the whole process when you're engaging with the candidate, what's actually in your control. What's in your control is how you engage with them. And like the thing I keep reminding my team right now is, like, especially during COVID, the way you make people feel, the impressions that we leave with people matter more now than ever. That's our brand. These are our customers. That's that long lasting perception of truth of your organization. And so the measurement of candidate connections is just frankly like our ability to measure how and when we're engaging with people in a timely way. And that's something that we can deliver on that promise of how we do that and make that commitment. And so, yeah, we're looking at a host of other productivity metrics. Sure, we're looking at time and stage and conversion rates and all those other things. But to me, the metric that matters is how we are engaging with candidates. If you do all those things right, the rest of it works out.
Yes, I think you said that very well. We run a pretty KPI, or we used to run a pretty KPI heavy organization. We measure everything. We don't hold recruiters accountable to everything, but we measure everything. And certainly this situation has been very, very different for us. So we have switched from really measuring the what to the how. And the how is exactly what you said, Annie. And for us, it is candidates and our candidate experience and feedback. and touch points. There are also other things that we're looking to our recruiters to do, given that we don't have a lot of recruiting right now. And they have jumped in and they are helping our businesses. Our Eats business, of course, as you know, has gone through the roof. Ride's business has not. So we have recruiters on the Eats business. We have recruiters on the freight business helping with sales. And so we also look at the contribution that they make outside of their day-to-day roles, and the impact that they make. We're partnered with LinkedIn on their Recruiting for Good initiative. And so our recruiters are recruiting for hospitals and nonprofits. And so we are looking at some of those things. So definitely more qualitative than quantitative. And I consider that highly productive as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I agree with both Annie and Danielle. And I think now is the time too, to really, when we talk about radical empathy and we talk about what that candidate experience feels like for them in this space, knowing they have several different scenarios that are going on into their home, and over communicating and being that empathetic advocate for them with this process. Some of them are unemployed now. And what does that look like? So the level of communication and a relationship that we're building with our candidates is our priority. Our businesses, and as we continue to grow, we'll always want to see our other metrics that are standard with top of funnel and conversion and what that looks like. And the opportunity that we have right now with moving at a not as aggressive pace as we have been previously is developing that relationship with our candidates. Whether they meet our bar or not, we want them to be fans and advocates of Smartsheet and the opportunity and the conversations and the people that they were engaged with. But as Danielle, I can't reiterate enough that term of radical empathy, and it's just such a term that's needed across for ourselves as employees and for our candidates and who we're engaged with. So
something I'd like to share with y'all that we've employed actually at Flawless, and I think that we're seeing ways, everybody's looking for tools and ways to be able to close the social distance that we have been mandated to have. And in recruiting, one of the things that we typically did for local candidates is we would sit down, have a cup of coffee with the candidate, talk to them about the role, and really do a one-on-one selling. But of course, we're all making use of what we're doing right here, which is not gathering in a room or using the video conferencing. Well, something we've done for our small team, for our boutique firm, is we basically are using an app that has us all in the room at the same time, and we literally leave the app on while we're working. And so what we have is a screen, we have audio if we unmute, and if we have something to say to somebody, it's like turning to them in the next cube, except it's even closer than that. And just saying, hey, Justin, have you found such and such a candidate for our client over here? And it's completely, I want to say, obfuscated our idea about going back into the office. We feel like we are in the office. I think, is that true, Anders? Haven't you found that to be helpful for us?
Yeah, it's a great topic, and actually it came up in a previous webinar that we hosted that was focused on the recruiting perspective to adaptation to sourcing and retaining candidates during the early stage of the pandemic. And it really closed the physical distance, the barrier to connection that I think a lot of recruiters and sales folks thrive on, is that feeling of collaboration in an open pit type environment. And yeah, it's worked really well to engage the collaboration tools. The video tool he's talking about is called House Party, and it works for us. There's other similar tools out there, but frankly, it was a wonderful discovery that we tried because someone else suggested it in a previous webinar. And I think that kind of tribal knowledge that we employed after a previous webinar, hopefully folks that are listening now can learn something, whether it's House Party or radical empathy, and implement that into your daily practice. So yeah.
Have you guys been using any tools like that to with your smaller teams to be able to kind of sit with each other still and on a daily basis, or have you considered that?
We haven't used any other tools, but we have had a couple meetings where we've kind of implemented the no red mics So no matter what's going on in your environment, let's just have everybody on. And if you're hearing someone's dog snoring or the kids are coming in or whatever that looks like, it's okay. And it's a safe space for that to happen. But we were getting to this very stiff and rigid space of like nobody was talking because they were muted. But it's just, this is a no red mic meeting, everybody's on, and let's just talk through what we're going through. So, but haven't used any apps yet, but House Party sounds very interesting.
Yeah, and you can lock, if you're on House Party, by the way, anyway, I was going to say how I got this from my daughter, actually, who is listening today, gave me the idea of this. We were doing it for the family. And because we're spread out, we're all over the place. And we started just leaving it on. And then I said, why don't we use this for the office? And so what's great is you can lock the group. So if you just let people in, that way you don't have people crashing your party.
I know that a group of my engineers try actually using actually Zoom to do those parties. The interesting part about this situation in COVID is the fact that we are not necessarily just working remotely. We have all our personal life are part of that. So not everybody can actually be, oh, I'm in my basement office and yeah, sure, I'm opening this up. So not everybody felt really comfortable with having that going all the time. Also, what changed is the norm of 9 to 5 workday. People no longer really work 9 to 5. They work in whatever hour works for them with some synchronization in between. So that is also making it a little bit challenging. So again, it's going back to the team culture. Teams that do work like that would enjoy a house party.
Love it. That's great info. Great. So I wanted to move on to just talking about the partnership between recruiting and engineering in particular. It can be a strained relationship that we have. It can be a very fluid one. It depends upon, of course, each group, each hiring manager, to some extent, each recruiter. I'm curious what, though, from a senior perspective that you all have, what do you think could improve or be a best practice for better partnership between recruiting and engineering hiring? I'll open it up to any of you.
I'll jump in. Was anybody else
Nope.
ready to go?
Go
Okay,
ahead.
I'll kick us off. It's an interesting one. So I had mentioned earlier that we're kind of undergoing this reimagine journey right now. I think we're sort of optimizing. We're all optimizing for this current situation. We're learning, we're experimenting. The truth that kind of keeps prevailing for me here that we have a real opportunity, both from a recruiting perspective and then from, let's say, a headcount planning perspective for engineering leaders, and then from a finance perspective, is we actually have an opportunity now to truly become a proactive, like take this partnership, rebuild it with this lens of proactivity. I think recruiting, the nature of the way headcount is set up and the way that we sort of do finance planning and et cetera, is we're in this sort of reactive, responsive mode, especially with backfill headcount, that's separate, but even with new positions. And I know that I'd love to hear from Jen and Danielle too. I'm sure that we're experimenting with evergreen recs and doing core profiles, but it seems to be the exception versus the norm. And I think we actually have an opportunity to kind of reimagine how headcount, we can become more opportunistic, especially with, I know how passionate, we are, and some of these folks are really around diversity, and specifically with that, like we need to think about when talent presents itself, there is an asynchronous to this as well. It's not during that narrow window. And I think getting finance on board, that we have to think differently about our headcount and then be willing to hire talent when the talent is ready and not when we're ready. And that's a reframe there. And then I think the second piece is the TAM, the total accessible market. Someone earlier, I can't remember if it was Jen or Danielle, mentioned about I think I heard someone talking about transferable skills. And that's a big thing that we're really trying to tackle at Zillow Group as well. And I think that opens the aperture for talent. And as we're thinking about that, it's engineering leaders, I think we've got to be in lockstep on that journey together to see, if we're thinking about this full national world that's open to us, if we're going to be hiring more virtual, more hybrid, broader talent pool, but then how do we together assess that talent and make sure that we're willing to look at our criteria, not like a litany of detailed bullet requirements, but really what are those core profiles we can turn. Recruiting can activate a proactive engine for you and really become a strategic proactive partner if we can simplify and open up that aperture, and then thirdly, become more proactive. And I think if we can do those three things, I think that's going to really elevate the partnership and then allow us together to just hire better, higher quality, more diverse talent for our business.
I want to chip in and say that, answering the core of the question that you asked, what made my relations with recruiter more profound and actually true partnership is when both of us thought that we are 100% aligned together to reach something and that we are actually part of one team. And when those alignment happen, and this is what I have in Smartsheet, I have an amazing recruiter who works with me. I share with her more information than I share actually with my HR. I consult with her more often than I do with my regular HR business partner. And we both know what's going on in all matters, so we can actually chip in and figure out how we bring the right talent to the right place. Full ownership along the entire cycle, the amazing embracement work that she would be doing to the candidate, that I know that they're in the right hand. I'm getting feedback from candidates that said, oh, this was an amazing discussion. She was there for us for every moment of the time that we needed. And I know that I have someone that I can trust with bringing and keeping this right talent along this pipeline from conceived to hire. And it's the notion of external or internal partnership. And it's not about like where they work, it's more about the state of mind. If you and your recruiter are in a state of mind that this is an internal partnership and you're truly all together in that through the entire steps of the funnel, that makes it extremely successful and also increase the satisfaction of the folks, the candidate hired through that. So that's what I noticed worked really well. In the past, I worked in those situations where hires were very central, and therefore they were just giving services. And in that services mode, I end up not necessarily trusting that a candidate that brought in would actually be treated well throughout the entire funnel, or even finalized. I had times where people were complaining, nobody called them to say you didn't pass the interview, or were given some kind of more personal note. So I think that unique connection and mindset is what makes this partnership working very well.
So Ronit, I just want to know the name of your recruiter.
Yeah.
No, do not share that. Do not share that.
And Jen, you know that the recruiter paid Ronit to say that because you're on the line as the boss.
I highly doubt that. She's fantastic. And I think that the pivot for us in this space was really coming together as a talent organization and owning the same OKRs that our engineering partners own together. And they're not going to be successful without the human capital that we are providing on the front end and being in lockstep there. One of the things that has worked out splendidly for us is we meet on a weekly basis with our FP&A partner, our HR business partner, our recruiting leaders, and all of our engineering leaders. And we talk through funnel. We talk through what that looks like. We understand on our capacity planning who's in the pipeline and where they're going to be fitting in, and if we need more headcount and what that looks like. And that's been a huge catalyst for us to be able to move swiftly, but also to create those partnerships internally that we own these business objectives with you. We're in this together with you. And making that pivot has been very successful for us.
From an engineering perspective, Andrew, you might have a thought on this. Where have you seen the points of friction over the years between, say, engineering, hiring, and recruiting?
I think Rohit actually went straight to the solution. So if you work backwards there, and I completely agree with what you say, but I'll get to that. The friction has been when engineering has viewed recruiting as a service that delivers to them, and the success, and I think you were talking about internal versus external, the success where we've turned that around is where we've embedded both HR and recruiting in the team, and made them part of the team. So that, you know, our recruiting partners and our HR partners in Motorola Solutions, recruiting reports up through HR. So it's kind of simple. As soon as they're sitting in the same room, telling the same jokes, eating the same chow, as it were, they become part of the team. And, you know, my HR partner, who's awesome, and I'm not going to tell you her name, actually travels with us. So when we, you know, we're very distributed. So when I'm doing an ops review in Krakow or something, she will come with us and be part of that and be in all of those same discussions. Where we can, we'll get the recruiters in. My largest site in the US is in Salt Lake City, and I am hiring, just put that out there, in Salt Lake City. But we actually got
we can help you with that, Andrew.
There you go. There you go. But what, you know, Motorola Solutions is a Chicago-based company. In fact, I have an office in Chicago, even though I'm here. But as soon as we broke that and put the recruiter in Salt Lake City to be with the team, we removed a lot of that friction and made them part of that team. So I think the pithy answer is stop looking at recruiting as a service. Think of recruiting as part of a team.
Danielle, were you gonna say something?
Well, I'll just add, sort of from my perspective, as we think about how we partner with a business and at what point we would feel 100% successful for Uber. It sort of lies in our vision, and it's going to be a journey to get there. So we're far from being there, but we're actively working on it. And the vision that we have is that we ignite opportunity by delivering global diverse talent on demand, enabled by high tech and high touch. And if we get this vision right, I think we will be successful, but it will be a journey.
Victoria Day, one of the participants, asked Ronit and Jen, aside from weekly syncs, can you please share some concrete actions that your recruiters take to ensure that they are 100% on the same page with your business unit?
Jen, you can answer that in the entire engineering level. I think you'll probably do that better than myself. Just as a micro example, my engineer and my recruiter and myself are chatting with each other on a daily basis. So our synchronization is so often that, you know, she knows what's going on, and I know what is the challenges that she has, whether it's you know, figuring out what's the compensation level we should offer a candidate, or how can we better communicate with the candidate to convince them to join in, and or how to adjust the position if something has changed. So our very day-to-day communication create that. But in general, I think the work that that you guys are doing in general, I think it would be very interesting to share.
With that weekly meeting, we talk through each critical pool of candidates and kind of where they're at, if they're at tech screen, if they're at the loop phase, if we're offering, and really trying to understand what their motivations are in each space. There was a time where we were missing quite a bit on the tech side going into the hiring manager interview, and we were just not hitting the tech bar on the recruiting end. So Ronit and her peers got together, specifically helped us redefine the questions that we needed to ask on the front end for this particular skill set. And that's fluid for us. We are constantly evolving the questions we're asking on the front end to be able to calibrate the right talent that they're needing. And it's ever changing. I think that we also have a recruiter assigned per VP senior director to focus strictly on what they're working on, and they run full cycle. So we're not handing off anywhere, and we're having the relationship from the beginning to the absolute end. So we're understanding the motivators. We're understanding where they were at with their leveling and what that looks like, and continuing those conversations. And our engineering leaders and our engineering hiring managers, and they're in constant communication with their recruiting and HR teams, and very open to that. I mean, Ronit knew about this panel a couple of days ago and made the time and found the time, and she speaks and writes and coaches and mentors, and she's not the only one of our engineering leaders that does that. So that's rare to find.
You know, all I have to say is that I wish that Ronit and Andrew were the engineering leaders at a couple of my previous companies when I was trying to get my recruiters to partner, and they were saying, no, they don't want to hear from you. They don't want to talk to you. And the fact that that's something that's trickling out there, I think, into the ethosphere, if you will, I think it's fantastic that there is more partnership that is going on between HR. Finance is also a piece of that, as we were talking about headcount planning and recruiting and engineering. I think that's fantastic. That's great feedback, you guys.
Chris, I was just going to add one, just a couple quick tactical things. I know the question, I think the person had asked is there's a few sort of tangible takeaways. And I think Ronit and Jen shared some, like, really framed it up really well with some actionable things you can do. I think one other piece I wanted just to quickly add as well is that I think you both alluded to this. It's all that upfront work. I think that's the piece that we've really come to, and especially for growing businesses, unless you have the deep relationship of a hiring manager and recruiter, you've got the history, you filled positions together, you really understand the drivers, the team, the loop, all those things. I think it's that upfront investment is so critical. And we found just in a growing and scaling organizations, people are coming in, hiring managers, new leaders, new recruiters are bringing, practices and biases and they're sort of what they thought to be best practices. And I think, we hadn't talked a lot about data, but I think really grounding in the historical data together can be a really powerful thing too. I mean, even just looking at, for example, if you're coming into a position, and let's just say it's, whatever it would be, a principal engineer, and just even looking and aligning on, okay, if it's going to be a 5-month fill, like how can we together partner to reduce that? What's the roles we can play? So like the words, I mean, you're hearing this word active partnership, but aligning on that, but then aligning, pre-briefing, really making sure all your interviewers are completely aligned with that reality. And at the time of how you're debriefing, I think it starts with that partnership, but also all those key players that are involved in the process, your pod, your RC, your sourcer, everyone needs to be sort of involved in that truth. Because that's where all the misalignment happens. I mean, we all know how this goes sideways when you just miss pieces of information, and really expectation management. A lot of it's rooted in data. And then I think you two mentioned that rubric for decision-making is really, really key to try to get that clarity on upfront.
Thank you, Annie. That's great. We are getting to the end of the hour, and Anders, did you have anything else, or are there any other questions that you've seen?
Well, I was going to ask if there was any final comments before just wrapping up here with a couple logistical comments, but mostly thank you, each of you panelists for joining us today. A lot of ground we covered, from house party to radical empathy. It was really engaging discussion.
Any final thoughts?
Inviting us.
Any final thoughts from any of you?
Well, I think now is a great time to recruit. I know it might be counterintuitive and companies are putting the brakes on hiring, but this is a really, really good time to be out there and talking to people and building your pipeline, and either actively recruiting or getting strong talent lined up when you're ready to hire.
Right. And I think Annie's comment about reframing thinking about hiring, rock star candidates, whether it's a niche technical skill set or diversity channels, if you can lift the sort of restrictions on open headcount and hire candidates as they're available, that will probably, improve things in the long run. So.
Mm-hmm. Now is a great time to be working on building your employee value proposition. If you hadn't really spent the time before and made the investments, now's the time, because employees want it, candidates want it. They want to know your truth, and they want to see that truth is delivered through their employee experience. And that's our work as employers.
Absolutely. Yeah, and in summary, again, just a genuine thank you to each of you for spending your time, sharing your tribal knowledge today. Everyone that attended, I think, learned quite a bit. And so hopefully we can all, take this knowledge and improve our own processes and procedures within our organizations. And again, from, whether it's house party or learning how to strategically use Slack channels to improve communication or really embrace radical empathy. Hopefully we can make a positive change after today. So yeah, as mentioned at the beginning, we did record the webinar, and we will be sending that out after if people want to go back and listen again to what was discussed. And in summary too, we're sending out a Qualtrics survey. We would love your feedback. The reason we're meeting today with this topic is it was actually from you all who attended the previous webinars and provided some suggestions for this topic, and having engineering and recruiting, talent acquisition on the same conversation. So thank you for that suggestion. And again, thank you for your time today. So everyone, take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you.